This is Dr. James, and I get questions a lot in my office and online about how scared you should be if you have vaccinated children around unvaccinated children. And so I think maybe the easiest way to do this is to go through the way you get the different things that we vaccinate against. So in your first year of life, you're going to get a hepatitis B vaccine that is mainly there to protect you against getting hepatitis B from your mother. So that's going to be something that we're not going to necessarily worry too much in that first several years of life, except for that transmission at birth. Then we get DTaP, which is diphtheria. This is contagious, but this is really only going to be, we've pretty much done away with diphtheria in the United States. So the only diphtheria we ever get in the United States is from people who are infected coming into our country from other countries. We probably have only had maybe 5 cases in the last 6 or 7 years, so not a big worry. Tetanus, which we get from the dirt. So it's not non-vaccinated people that are going to give you that. Acellular pertussis, which is whooping cough. That is one of the things we're going to worry about. So we're going to remember that one. Polio you would get from non-vaccinated people, but to be honest, that's mainly only going to be if you're in Pakistan or Afghanistan these days. We don't see a lot of polio anymore, thank goodness. And then Haemophilus. This is going to be one we're going to talk about. Haemophilus lives in people's nose and throat. Actually lives there whether you're vaccinated or not. Then we have the vaccine called Prevnar, which is against strep pneumonia. Again, a bacteria that lives in people's nose and throat, whether they've been vaccinated or not. It's just that the vaccine keeps it from becoming invasive and causing more problems. So that's what we'll talk about. Then we have rotavirus, which is a GI bug. So we'll talk about that. Then between the time we're 1 and 2, we have hepatitis A, which is going to come from usually contaminated food or water. So we don't have to worry about unvaccinated people giving that to us. Chickenpox and measles and mumps, okay, which is contagious. So we're going to talk about those 7 things. So you kind of have windows. So the main window that we worry about being around, anybody is the first 2 months, because these babies just don't have much immune system and they don't have a very good, what's called a blood-brain barrier that keeps bacteria that might end up in their blood from crossing over into their brain. So they're much more susceptible to meningitis. So the first 2 months, none of them are vaccinated, and we worry about all of them. Then they start getting their vaccines. And so until 4 months, most deaths from whooping cough happen before 4 months of age. And most people that get pertussis are either unvaccinated if they're children, or adults that the vaccine has waned with time. And so that's one reason why they recommend that if you're pregnant, that you and your household contacts get updated on your pertussis vaccine, because most babies that are getting pertussis are actually getting it from their parents. So pertussis would be one that you worry about until they get their shots at 4 months. Then they're protected, so you don't have to worry about them being around the people that are unvaccinated, because they have their vaccines, they're protected. Same thing with that strep pneumonia and Haemophilus. By 4 months, they've been vaccinated twice, usually, if they're on time. And so then they're protected. So the only people that would have to worry about it is the unvaccinated. Okay. There is a window from 6 months to a year that we worry about the possibility of getting chickenpox, measles, and mumps. And that's because mom's immunity that she passed through the placenta protects the young child. We don't see a lot of babies less than 6 months old get chickenpox, measles, or mumps. Never have. And that's because that maternal antibodies, either mom was protected, got antibodies because she actually got the disease, or nowadays it's because mom got vaccinated when she was young, and so she passes those antibodies to the baby. So you don't see those for the first 6 months, but then at 6 months, those start to go away. And so from 6 months until they get those vaccines is when they're going to see it. In fact, that's almost always when I see chickenpox anymore, is in that 6 months from the time they're 6 months old until they're a year and they get their chickenpox vaccine. So there's that window of time from 6 months to whenever they get their chickenpox or MMR vaccine that you would worry about getting those 3 types of diseases from somebody who wasn't vaccinated. So what we're saying here is for the most part, except in that first 2 months, or from 6 months to a year, or 6 months to 15 months, except for those little windows, you really have very little to worry about from unvaccinated people. So why is it such a big deal? Why do the schools make such a big deal about people being vaccinated if the people that are really at risk would be the unvaccinated? It's because of the children who either can't be vaccinated or their vaccines don't work. So there are kids, of course, that can have allergies and have allergies to the components of the vaccines and can't have them. But more importantly, there's kids that are immunocompromised. So we have things like severe combined immunodeficiency, where those children just can't produce antibodies. And so therefore, if you give them the vaccine or not, it doesn't matter. They're not going to produce antibodies, so they have no protection. You have people that are on chemotherapy. Now you would go, they have chemotherapy. Are they really going to school? Yes, they're really going to school. There are lots of kids on chemotherapy that are going to school that they're not so sick that they can't go to school. And then there's chemo that's used for other things besides cancer. I have kids that are receiving chemotherapy drugs for juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, for plaque psoriasis, for things like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. All these kids are on those immunosuppressants. So if someone who was unvaccinated got some of these diseases and they were contagious, then they could pass it to these children. And because they're immunocompromised, they are going to be in the small percentage of people who can die and have terrible consequences from these diseases. There's also people that are immunocompromised because they've been on high-dose steroids. So again, people with rheumatoid arthritis, people with severe asthma, things like this that can make them have life-threatening illnesses from some of these preventable diseases. That's the real people that the schools are trying to protect, is these children that the only way they're protected is by making sure that the other people around them don't have the disease. So how worried do you have to be about unvaccinated people? Well, if you don't have an immune-compromised child and they're not on immune-compromising drugs, really it's that first 2 months of life and that period of time from the time they're 6 months old until they get their chickenpox and their MMR vaccine. I hope that helps.